you gotta get a new one. This one's great. I guess you just don't delete things. I don't know why you have 2 no times to explain. I'm gonna guess you don't have time to explain that. I'm deleting one for you. Welcome to Destiny Hoarders Episode 2. Today we'll be curating yet another vault. Bear in mind that just like last time, we'll be looking for the best of the best gear within the vault while ultimately trying to trim down anything we can afford to. If you missed the first vault deletion, I'll go ahead and throw a link to it here now, at the end of the video and in the description, so consider that mandatory viewing material. There may be a pop quiz in the beginning of the next video and it may be graded. Let's go ahead and get started with Clerkin's vault. Thank you, Clerkin. First we'll look at Quickfang, the hunter exclusive sword. 2 of his rolls are immediately a bit weak because One for All is just bad on swords, and especially so on Quickfang. If you're using heavy ammo on weak enemies, your base damage is probably enough to kill them in one shot already, so a damage buff that only applies after the 3rd kill is a bit redundant. Assassin's Blade's a much better perk for that column since it boosts movement speed on top of the sword's intrinsic lightweight, which is the main reason a lot of people run it in the first place, plus you're still not missing out on a damage perk with that. Unfortunately, Clerkin doesn't have an Assassin's Blade roll. His only alternative is On Guard, which is at least a more accessible buff. Looking at the 3rd column, we have Thresh, Energy Transfer, and Relentless Strikes. Thresh is not great for a heavy weapon, since running it on a primary gives all the same advantages without any of the ammo economy cost. Energy Transfer is bad on Quickfang. It's actually hard to understand why Bungie even included it. Quickfang is locked into always having Swordmaster's Guard, so it has awful guard efficiency, endurance, and resistance, which means that a lot of the damage that you guard from will bleed through, while also heavily reducing your remaining sword energy, and even if you don't get shot while guarding, you can't guard for very long. But then let's say you do manage to use the perk properly, you're boosting the recharge speed of Hunter Dodge, which is already the fastest ability cooldown in the game by a good margin, so it really doesn't need that help. All said and done, Energy Transfer is a dismal perk for hunters in general, but especially so for a sword with Swordmaster's Guard, which includes Quickfang. Finally, there's Relentless Strikes, which is by far the best perk in that slot, particularly because Quickfang has relatively low damage per swing and high relative ammo economy to compensate, so Relentless Strikes gets a lot of value. All things considered, we're really looking for a Relentless Strikes Assassin's Blade roll, but nothing we have is close to that. I would say you could argue for the Thresh On Guard roll or the Relentless Strikes One for All roll as the keeper here, but the Relentless Strikes roll is essentially an inferior Falling Guillotine, so I go ahead and keep the On Guard roll for a usable damage perk until I got an Assassin's Blade roll. All this said, our winner in the situation is still basically a 5 out of 10 at best, so we're really only keeping it to not have 0 Quickfangs left. Next up, we have Truth Teller. On breech-loaded grenade launchers, you're looking for blinding grenades. This perk isn't rare enough to bother keeping rolls that don't have it. They are immediately vastly inferior. The Grave Robber Swashbuckler roll is interesting though, since it allows you to weaken enemies and then punch them as a follow-up, which leads to a better chance at one-shotting your next opponent. So it would be kind of good for PvP. That said, I wouldn't be holding on to it, since it's almost always smarter to finish off enemies with your primary after setting up the kill with a grenade launcher. Since it's only reloading one shot at a time, the Grave Robber roll only makes sense to keep if you're really into PvP. Between the 2 actually decent rolls, the main difference is the masterwork, reload versus velocity, and I'm going to go ahead and say reload speed is just objectively better. Most of the time you'll be taking advantage of autoloading, so you won't even see the reload speed, but it only has to be better than velocity, which does pretty much nothing for you. A 10-point difference in the stat isn't going to significantly impact how much you may need to lead a shot, and it's still going to be a projectile, but most importantly of all, with blinding grenades, we have a utility weapon where loading your next shot is your top concern. At the end of the day, a difference in masterwork means almost nothing, but between the 2, reload is better. We moved on to machine guns, and we'll be looking exclusively at 2 different Void raid weapons with this set. As we can see with the numbers alone, our boy Clerkin has been doing quite a bit of Vault of Glass. What? I really hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but all of his corrective measures fall short of a roll that is worth holding on to. The problem is his commemoration is actually great. Reconstruction and Rampage means you're going to have a gigantic magazine that will almost always have boosted damage, and that roll is good enough that it's kind of funny that the Zen Moment Unrelenting roll hasn't been deleted because those perks fall behind pretty far on both accounts. Because this one's awful, and this one's not. Anyway, the Reconstruction Rampage roll is awesome, and since it's void, just like Corrective Measure, that means that Corrective Measure is going to need to clear that bar to be worth its vault space, and it really doesn't. The Vault of Glass weapons have access to utility perks in the first slot. which is unusual since normally if you wanted Wellspring, Demolitionist, Thresh, or some others, you're going to have to give up damage perks to achieve that, not with the Vault of Glass weapons. Corrective Measure is good specifically because it can get Demolitionist and One for All or Adrenaline Junkie. It's pretty tragic that despite having a dozen corrective measures almost, somehow Clerkin didn't get Demolitionist even a single time. The next best option is Rewind Rounds, but in practice that's just budget reconstruction. They both boost your magazine, but one requires you to hit a ton of your shots, and the other requires you to not be dead for a little while. Then there's One for All, which is pretty much just as good as Rampage on a machine gun, so we'll just consider those equal perks, although my personal opinion is that Rampage is a slight improvement since it doesn't have to be re-procced every 10 seconds. All said and done, the Commemoration is just better than any of the corrective measures, including the time lost ones, unfortunately. If you want Corrective Measure to live up to its potential, it really needs Demolitionist. That said, keeping the Rewind Rounds Firefly Adept roll is still a cool trophy, so we'll hold on to that one. Next up, we have another ridiculous set of Vault of Glass weapons, stored away with Hezen Vengeance. Much like Corrective Measure, there's a perk that absolutely needs to be here, and on this one, it's Overflow. Being able to chamber 2 rockets at once is great, especially because you can get an instant reload out of it if you space yourself away from an ammo brick well enough. In the next slot, we're going to be looking for Vorpal Weapon, and would you look at that, Clerkin actually has a bunch of Overflow Vorpal Weapon rolls, and one of them is Time Lost too. As it turns out, even without looking at any of the non-Time Lost ones, I could say they are pretty safe to dismantle because his Time Lost roll on the Hezen Vengeance is a god roll, and none of the standard rolls are going to be able to outperform it when you take Adept mods into account. However, as we're sharding all of the standard ones, there is one thing that stands out worth holding onto for a moment, and that's the auto-loading Vorpal roll with Alloy and Impact Casing. That's a slightly different use case since it's designed for passive reload, so a lot of players would have an easier time getting use out of that than Overflow. Alloy Casing is also a great reload speed booster, and Impact Casing synergizes most strongly with auto-loading since you can get a slight damage boost. For me personally, I wouldn't keep them both, but we have two fantastic rolls here that are both well worth holding onto for most players. It feels good to delete some guns not because they're bad, but because they actually have a better roll available. That's really nice. Moving on, we're going to take a quick look at some shotguns, starting with Found Verdict. First off, I would like to note that Found Verdict is an awful PvE weapon. Aggressive frame shotguns simply are not good right now for a handful of reasons. They basically have nothing going for them. That said, there is essentially two reasons to keep a pellet shotty. Either it's good in PvP, or it fits into a 1-2 punch build and you don't have any other 1-2 punch guns. If we're trying to get a good roll for PvP, we definitely are looking for surplus. You need that handling really badly, so anything without it is automatically out. Next, we're looking for opening shot, and we've immediately ruled out all but one roll since one of his guns actually has best in slot for both main perks. Taking a further look at the surplus opening shot roll, we'll see it also has range masterwork, full choke, and light mag, which is best in slot across the board, minus light mag not being potentially assault mag or accurized rounds. But the gun is pretty darn close to being absolutely perfect, so we can safely dismantle any of the other PvP role contenders. As we said before, Vorpal Weapon is not something you were looking for in aggressive frame for PvP, because it's not going to make you one-shot supers, and while Unrelenting isn't the worst ever for PvP, it's not worth giving up the handling from surplus. Then for PvE, we've got two 1-2 punch rolls. One has auto-loading, the other doesn't. We already have a winner. That said, the Deicide Shotgun is actually just better for a 1-2 punch PvE weapon because it can roll Grave Robber instead of auto-loading while being a much more desirable frame, since its frame will have better race handling and fire rate. Regardless, a 1-2 punch shotgun is a 1-2 punch shotgun, and honestly, the rest of the perks hardly change the use case. Next up, we have Sojourner's Tale. This first roll with Quick Draw Opening Shot is good for PvP if you want to use a slug shotgun and exotic primary like Ace of Spades, so for a serious PvP player, this is a keeper. I'd just stick with using the Chaperone or Duality and a legendary primary myself, but this gun does have its niche. After that, we're looking for PvE rolls, and we have one with Quick Draw Frenzy and one with Auto-Loading Frenzy, and I'd say that Frenzy isn't the best perk for a PvE slug shotty since it's already competing with First In Last Out that can roll Vorpal, or Bone Chiller that can roll One for All and Triple Tap, or Demolitionist. So if you want to run Sojourner's Tale, I'd be looking specifically for Surrounded personally, but either way, auto-loading and a damage perk is nice, so the auto-loading Frenzy roll is a solid gun worth holding on to. Next up, we have Scout Rifles, and I'm going to be honest, I feel like the perks on these barely matter since the majority of their use cases involve being so far away that you're not under any pressure at all. We already have a lot of good rolls for all of them, but let's start with the Vault of Glass set, looking at Vision of Confluence. Firstly, as always in PvE, we are looking for damage and reload perks. That means we're ruling out every roll except one on the spot, because the Surplus Frenzy roll is the only one that has both a damage and a reload perk. Wellspring is great in the first column, but none of the Wellspring rolls have Frenzy or Kill Clip, and we would really be looking for Frenzy there since it's going to be a reload boost too. Kill Clip is a great damage perk, but none of the Kill Clip rolls have a first column reload perk, and while Rewind Rounds does reduce the need for reloading, Rewind Rounds and Kill Clip doesn't synergize that strongly because the extra magazine size is going to drag on longer than Kill Clip's proc would. So the perks, despite looking good together, are actually pretty anti-synergistic. The Rewind Rounds Disruption Break roll would actually be best in slot for Solar Anti-Barrier Scout Rifle, but I would say Surplus Frenzy is enough stronger for general use that we're not really worried too much about the other roll being better in a specific arena. Overall, I'd say that a perfect roll would be Wellspring Frenzy, since it would cover utility and damage, but honestly, Vision of Confluence just has one of the strongest perk pools of all guns in the game. Clerkin set of rolls just happens to not be as synergistic as they could, although plenty of people might prefer some of the other rolls than what I've labeled as best, and that's fine. Next up, we have a ton of hand cannons to look at, so we'll be starting off with bottom dollar. Despite falling out of popularity a bit, 120 hand cannons are still really good in PvP, and multi-kill clip can still be a pretty strong perk despite not easily allowing 2 taps. 1 stack of multi-kill clip still allows you to 1 headshot 2 body shot kill, which is a big boost to ease of use, and 2 stacks of multi-kill clip does allow you to get a 2-tap headshot, which is hard to do, but it does happen. As a result, the rangefinder multi-kill clip roll will be really strong in PvP and could absolutely be the best of the bunch if you're into 120 still. Although, even in PvP, Outlaw is a really nice perk when you want to take advantage of multi-kill clip. The other rolls having Outlaw on them does make them better for PvE though, for sure, where you'll be able to proc Outlaw much more reliably and you're going to need the reload speed even more. And between the two, the one with Appended Mag is much better since having more bullets is important, but the 1 extra bullet you get comparatively from Extended Mag isn't worth giving up a chunk of reload speed. Frankly, Clerkin got really lucky to get magazine perks on both of them, but the Appended Outlaw multi-kill clip roll is just amazing for PvE. That's going to be really hard to beat. Palindrome is our next weapon, and I'm going to say up front that we are looking for as much range as we can get alongside other stat boosts. With a 140 hand cannon, we can't realistically expect to lower our time to kill with the use of perks like Rampage or Kill Clip, and we also aren't going to be able to outperform the bottom dollars in PvE, so what we really want is perks like Rangefinder and Quick Draw that make it as reliable as it can be as a 140 PvP weapon. There are actually quite a few that are going to be strong for that. Overflow pretty much removes the need to reload, Rangefinder is a great boost to range, which is super important, and Quick Draw is a huge boost to handling, which is also really strong. And unfortunately, none of Clerkin's rolls are the bang-on 5 for 5 good perks, but I'd say we are probably going to wind up going for the Bottomless Grief Rangefinder roll and the Quick Draw Thresh rolls, depending on the playstyle. A really aggressive player is probably going to want Quick Draw more and could afford to give up a bit of range to get it, but a less aggressive player would do a lot better to just get as much range as possible and accept slightly slower handling and reload speed. It's a bit unfortunate that none of the rolls got good main perks and good base range, but most of these would feel pretty usable, and even a not that great Palindrome is still pretty good. It's unfortunate to give up Overflow for Bottomless Grief, but range matters too much to worry about a quality of life reload perk. Next up, we have another slew of Vault of Glass weapons with Fatebringer. I'm not going to worry about PvP rolls on this weapon because even though it's perfectly viable, there are a lot of exotic kinetic hand cannons that are very good, and Clerkin already has an awesome Dire Promise that fills that role just fine. That being said, there's basically one role we're looking for on a PvE Fatebringer, and it's Explosive Rounds Frenzy. Frenzy gives you handling, damage, and reload speed all at once, and it stacks on top of the 10% bonus damage that you get from explosive payload in PvE, so Fatebringer is able to just hit outright harder than any other legendary hand cannon in PvE. Among the Frenzy rolls, we have some with all kinds of perks, but we're looking for the magazine boosters once we've established that we have Frenzy Explosive Payload, and that gives us a couple rolls with Tactical Mag, one with more range than the other, so it becomes our winner. When it comes to Fatebringer, rolling Frenzy and Explosive Payload is enough to be more than happy with the roll, and that's very easy to do on the Time Lost one since Explosive Payload is guaranteed. But a magazine booster and some range is the cherry on top, so he's got some really strong rolls, these look good. Just to cover the Dire Promises I was referring to earlier, there is 2 that have opening shot rangefinder rolls, one of which has slightly more total stats than the other and therefore is just better, but both would have been great for the standard use kinetic 140. The Overflow Swashbuckler roll isn't bad at all either. I think these are definitely good enough to not worry about trying to beat them with a PvP Fatebringer, which is perfectly fine once again, but it's going to fall behind in range due to not having rangefinder. Getting close to the end now, let's take a look at a couple SMGs. The IKELOS SMGs Clerkin has are all pretty good, but I feel like there's an immediate clear winner among them. Threat Detector is a great perk for SMGs since their effective range means that you're almost always going to have Threat Detector procced, and especially on a low rate of fire SMG, we really don't need dynamic sway reduction. If the dynamic sway was his only demolitionist roll, that would muddy the waters a bit, but the one that has Threat Detector rolls also has demolitionists, so we've already figured out the best roll just from that fact. That's not to say Disruption Break is bad by any means, but Demolitionist is just too good of a utility perk to pass up on it. On top of that, the Threat Detector Demolitionist role also has Surrounded as a swap, and Threat Detector Surrounded is like the poster child of synergy. And on top of that, it has Seraph rounds too, which is almost definitely best in slot. Next, we have some Death Adders, which I would say is probably one of the worst guns in the game, and it's practically the anti-Vision of Confluence in the sense that it has one of the worst perk pools out there. It has only one reload perk, Feeding Frenzy, and it has no damage perks at all. With that in mind, using it to boost the damage of other weapons isn't a bad idea, so Feeding Frenzy Disruption Break is pretty much the only role worth holding on to. I've seen plenty of people try to justify Dragonfly, and if you find that fun, more power to you. But in my opinion, on a 900 RPM SMG, I just don't think it's practical. And that's assuming we even roll with the idea that Dragonfly is a good perk, which is absolutely debatable, especially considering the fact that it demands Dragonfly spec to accomplish anything, so you're giving up either backup mag or Icarus grip or miner spec or something else that would have given you more value on a different gun with a different perk. Finally, we have the last archetype of weapons we'll be looking at today, sniper rifles. We have a handful of Praetus Revenges, unsurprisingly, and also unsurprisingly, our boy Clerkin's luck. They are all terrible. None of them have high impact reserves or frenzy, so none of them have the best damage perks available, which is pretty much the only reason you'd equip a 140 sniper rifle, since they're not very good for Crucible and they are terrible for sustained damage. And none of them have rewind rounds either, which is the only thing that makes Praetus Revenge unique or valuable compared to Supremacy. It's tragic, but these are all so far off the mark that I can't really imagine wanting to use any of them for anything. These are just not anywhere near the potential that Praetus Revenge could achieve. To end on a brighter final note though, Clerkin does have two great successions. I wouldn't keep a succession without Reconstruction, but there are two that do have it, one with Osmosis, which is great for match game utility, and one with Recombination, which is basically a mini Izanagi's Burden. I would say it's not quite as good as just having Vorpal Weapon, but it is absolutely very good, and it does have Tactical Mag, which is by far best in slot. It's by far the best succession that he has, and it's pretty much the only kinetic sniper that he would ever want to equip for PvE, so that is a big win and a great note to end on. Thank you again, Clerkin, for letting me look through your vault. I hope this cleanup has helped settle which weapons are worth keeping for you for a bit, and thank you for watching, everyone. Hope I've helped you know a bit better what to look for in your own weapons. If you missed the first video, I'm going to link that again one more time for you now, just like before. And if you have weapons you'd like for me to take a look at, feel free to drop them in the Slayer Rates channel on my Discord, link in the description for that. Appreciate you, and I will see you in the next episode of Vault Hoarders. Before I wrap up this video, I'd like to take a moment to thank my sponsor, Evolve. I recently upgraded my PC for the first time since switching to PC at the beginning of Destiny 2, and it has been an absolutely incredible experience. The performance, both streaming and gameplay-wise, is just much better than before, and I am absolutely thrilled about my new computer. Evolve has builds at basically every price point, which is really great for people who aren't quite as tech-savvy, or if you wanted to customize your build and get exactly what specs you're looking for, that's an option too. Either way, you can save on shipping, which is about $70 value, by using code SLAYERAGE checkout, and I'm going to put a link to that in the description, so if you're in the market to buy a new PC or upgrade one you already have, definitely think about checking out Evolve. Thank you very much, Evolve, for sponsoring my own upgrade.